Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, The Light in Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace and blessings be on each and every one of you. Dear viewers, in this segment, we are continuing with some questions which had been sent in by the email. My email address is fld3@hotmail.com. This was sent in by a former student of mine, Abdul Wahab Sharara, who is currently doing his PhD in the United States at Purdue University. And he mentioned, this was in pharmaceutical sciences, he mentioned that having come to study in America, he found himself being confronted with a variety of different questions, some of which, he really didn't know how to answer. The atheists and others throwing questions at him. And so he gave me a list of some 7 questions, 2 of which was answered in previous program. And now we'll continue on with the remainder of his questions. Question number 3 that the students have thrown at him. What is the purpose of worship? Why should we worship God? What good would it serve? God does not need our prayers. What is the purpose of worship? God doesn't need our prayers. Well, let's start with the final statement. God doesn't need our prayers. This is true. God does not need our prayers. This is stated so many times in the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad reiterated it, saying that if all of the people of the world were to gather together and to ask Allah, it would not decrease Allah in any way or increase Him in any way. And if they all did not pray, did not gather to worship Him at all, it would not affect Him, decrease His stature, His majesty, His glory in any way. So, if the prayers are not needed by God, then who needs them? This is the question. It is human beings who need them. Why we worship, why God has prescribed prayers for us, because when we say, why do we worship, what is the purpose of worship? We have to ask ourselves, from whose perspective? From the perspective of human beings, the perspective of God. From the perspective of God, He has prescribed it. Why did He prescribe it? He prescribed it because we need to worship. Because human beings need to worship. Okay, why do we need to worship? What is the purpose of worship? The purpose of worship is fundamentally to keep one in contact with God, to develop in the individual a sense of consciousness of God, real consciousness. We find that, for example, where Allah says, "Aqim as-salah li dhikri," establish the prayer for my remembrance. Allah speaks about fasting, saying, "Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum, la'allakum tattaqun." Fasting was prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, in order that you become conscious of God. And so on and so forth. All of the various acts of worship are designed to help the individual establish a consciousness of God. Some person might say then, well, okay, I remember God. No need for me to pray. Let me leave that, prayer and all the fasting and these things. I remember God, so no need. Actually, somebody said this to me on one occasion. The point is that when God prescribed remembrance in this particular way, He prescribed it because this is the best way for us to remember God. Not in the way that we might think. We think ourselves, remembering God means every once in a while I say to myself, oh, there is a God. It's good. This remembrance of God is of no value. The remembrance of God which is of value is the remembrance of God which prevents us from evil and encourages us to do good. The prayer is training in preventing us from evil. For example, when a person stands to pray, his eyes or her eyes are focused on the point of prostration, where they're going to prostrate on the ground. They don't stand to prayer and they're looking here, left and right, and up and down, and all over the place. No. This is not permitted. They're supposed to look at the point of prostration. Why? To gain and to practice control of the eyes. Because so much of corruption exists in the world because of our eyes. This is why Allah says in the Quran, indeed the eyes, the hearing, the hearts will be asked about on the Day of Judgment. The eyes. And the Prophet ﷺ said that every descendant of Adam has written for himself or herself a portion of fornication. And that is in looking. In another version he said, Al-aynani tazniyan wa zinahuma an-nazar. The two eyes commit fornication, and their fornication is in looking. In the looking. Meaning that an individual staring at women, of course staring at them, meaning he's taking pleasure in the staring, this looking is an act of fornication. Of course, fornication of the eyes. It's not fornication in the full sense where a person becomes responsible and, the punishment of Islamic law comes on the individual. But there is a portion of fornication here. It is the beginning of fornication. A person looks, they're pleased, they chase, they commit crimes, etc., to try to achieve what has brought them pleasure in looking. So the eyes, we're responsible for them. They're a channel through which fornication begins. They're also the channel through which, corruption begins from a point of view of stealing, cheating. A person looks at somebody else's wealth, their car, their, home or whatever, and they're jealous and they want like it. They, it creates these desires inside themselves, and they want to get these things by any means necessary. This leads them to stealing and things like this. So again, one has to control the eyes. It's not to say you can't look at a person's property, etc., but not to look at it, staring at it, where it goes into one's heart in this way and that way. No. It's better if one starts to feel that one looks away. Don't keep staring at this thing. Don't keep looking at it. If you find yourself every time, your life is a simple life. Every time you look around you, you read magazines or whatever, you keep seeing things which cause you to become, desirous of these things, then it's better to avoid it, to avoid looking. So, the Salah teaches control of the eyes. Control of the eyes, and at the same time, it is control which is in obeying the commandments of God, and so on, through the various pillars of Islam. So, worship is designed to help the individual in his consciousness of God. God has prescribed it for human beings because they need it. We worship God because we need to worship God. We need to be in a state of remembrance of God. Because ultimately, one does sin, one commits evil when one forgets about God. When one forgets about accountability, that I'm going to be held accountable. Just as a human being, for example, he may desire to commit a crime, but he doesn't commit it because he sees the police. Right? Now, if the police are not there, then he will try to do it. Right? This is the norm. Where one is not conscious of God. Where one is conscious of God, one knows that whether people see or they don't see, whether the police are there or they're not there, then one should not commit that crime. It's the consciousness of God, which stops the individual. So, when one forgets God, when one puts aside that consciousness, then one can do evil and feel comfortable in doing that evil. So, religion prescribes worship to help develop God-conscious individuals who ultimately become good individuals. Individuals whose actions, whose words, whose thoughts are positive and help in building society and building good individuals, good families, good communities, etc. The next question, what is the purpose of creation? Worship is not a good enough reason for creation. Of course, when a person raised this question, of course, we go back to the verse where Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created, Allah said, the jinn and human beings except for my worship. Right? So this would be the standard answer that a Muslim would answer. What's the purpose of our creation? To worship God. So he says here, worship is not a good enough reason for creation. Well, from our point of view, that we are in need of worship to make us achieve the potential which God has created for human beings. We see the need there for worship. But in terms of God, why God created when he has no need for human worship, the question arises, why bother to create? Well, God, Allah, is the creator. The creation is a manifestation of his attribute of being the creator. A creator who creates and a creator who doesn't create, just on a limited analysis, obviously, the creator who creates is greater than the creator who doesn't create. And Allah is the greatest. This is the reality. The creation is a manifestation of the attributes of God. His mercy, Allah is the most merciful. It's manifest in his creation. How he provides for human beings who deny him, deny his existence, yet he provides for them. That is the greatness of his mercy. His kindness, being the Kareem, the kind and the noble. This is manifest against in his creation. How he grants human beings and creatures, certain qualities, certain attributes, certain things which make their lives good lives, pleasant lives, etc. And so on. So the creation itself is a manifestation of God's attributes. And from the human being point of view, the purpose is to worship God. Worshipping God in order, as I said, this is the purpose, but there's a goal behind it. That is for human beings to achieve the full potential for which they were created, to be righteous human beings, who would then inherit paradise. God created beings with a choice, as he created beings without choices, like animals, plants, angels, etc. He created human beings with a choice. This was by his will, his own decision to do that. One cannot now question God, well, why did you decide to do that? No. This is very presumptuous for a human being to think that he can now question God as to why he decided. No. God did it. He did it with a purpose. We can see purpose in our lives. We can see goodness. We can see evil. We can see the importance of choosing good. We can see worship helps us to do good, etc., etc. That is as far as we can go. We can